Big changes for casuals and gig workers as Labor pushes through workplace legislation. Energy giant AGL quadruples its profit, and Apple considers a flip phone. Welcome to Fear and Greed Business News, Australia's best business podcast. It is Friday, the 9th of February, 2024. I'm Michael Thompson, and good morning, Sean Aylmer.
Good morning, Michael. An Apple flip phone. I know you're an Apple family. Would you buy one?
I'm nearly laughing because I have to tell you a story about flip phones. I will get to it later.
Right.
That is what has nearly set me off early, but I can't wait for that story, Sean. I'm looking forward to it. You have an interview coming up after the show with Kirk Cheeseman, who is the Group Managing Director at National Credit Insurance, or NCI.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. NCI gets great insight into the economy because they basically provide insurance coverage for people who are waiting on invoices to come from third parties, that type of thing. So they see who's paying their bills and who isn't. So we talked to him about that and the different sectors, how they're performing. It's really interesting to get an insight to what's happening on the ground. So you often have to wait for months or weeks and sometimes months for the official Australian Bureau of Statistics figures. This chat with Kirk gets us much, much faster information. It's fascinating.
Yeah, it sure is. It is coming up after the show. It is well worth a listen today. And the main story this morning, Sean, is a big one, isn't it? Labor has done a deal to push through the third part of its workplace laws, allowing casuals to switch to permanent positions and introducing minimum pay for gig workers and owner drivers.
That's on top of the right to disconnect rules, which gives millions of workers a right to ignore after-hours emails, texts and calls. The closing loopholes legislation yesterday gained the support of independent senators David Pocock, Lydia Thorpe and Jackie Lambie. Those three, along with the Greens, means the deal's pretty much done. Workplace Relations Minister Tony Burke said the deal meant the Albanese government was poised to close more of the workplace loopholes that have been undermining wages and worker safety. There were some amendments. Businesses will have the right to refuse casual conversion on operational grounds, and contractors can't be forced to be employees if they earn above $167,000. You've got to remember, not all contractors, in fact, not all casuals want to become permanent, and not all contractors want to become employees. And that's what that's guarding against. The changes will also limit the coverage of the gig worker laws in a bid to exclude personal carers working on online apps. But in the end, Michael, the government got its way, and there are major changes on the way around casual workers, around late night phone calls and texts from your boss, and around gig economy workers. They will be introduced into Parliament over coming months. It'll have to go through the Senate, of course. We have support there. It's going to be a very, very big change for the workforce.
Yeah, it certainly will. And of course, as you would expect with a change of this magnitude, not everyone outside politics is happy with it, not happy with the legislation. Some peak business bodies and some CEOs have been pretty critical of the changes.
They sure have. The peak body for small businesses, COSBOA, and the peak body for large businesses, the Business Council of Australia, aren't happy. There's been a bunch of CEOs over recent months who have come out, particularly in the mining industry, where they've said this isn't going to work for them. There are some, like the Australian Retailers Association, who are broadly supportive of the changes. Well, they're probably actually broadly supportive. Probably not right. Yesterday they called it the least worst version of the legislation. So maybe they're not that happy, particularly around the ability of casual workers to convert to permanent employees. But they do like the amendments that the independents have forced on the government. So we've had tax reform and workplace reform all in the first week or so of Parliament this year. It's been pretty busy.
That has got to be a very, very productive week for Canberra, right?
Yeah, you'd think so. You'd think one of the things that Labor did last night was close down debate on it. And so the opposition were very upset. They said that they were sort of abusing that power and the legislation should be debated more than what it was. So they have really pushed it through. But yeah, look, if you think that these changes are good, or even if you don't think they're good, certainly the government is making or taking action around tax and around workplace.
Indeed. Now, how did local markets perform yesterday, Sean?
The S&P ASX 200 closed up just a bit, 0.3% to 7,638 points, with the technology and utilities sectors doing best. The biggest winners and losers reflected profit results, which I'll go through shortly. Among the large caps, the banks were generally better, with Commonwealth Bank and National Australia closing more than 1% higher. The big miners were mixed, while the retailers were generally lower. Hearing implant group Cochlear lifted its earnings guidance for the financial year on the back of strong demand for its devices. Its share price closed up 4.4%. Otherwise, mostly it was about actual earnings results.
All right, and what about international markets?
On Wall Street, the share price of chip maker Nvidia continues to run. It's up 40% this year. What are we, the 9th of February? So 40% in 6 weeks or so, or less than 6 weeks. That's on top of the 300% jump last year. It's now worth $1.73 trillion US dollars, just below the value of Amazon and Alphabet. Microsoft and Apple are still some way in front. They're at that $3 trillion US dollar mark. But the AI boom, or at least the froth around AI expectations, has meant Nvidia, which makes chips for people wanting AI, Nvidia is now the 5th largest company on Wall Street. The flip side, earnings season has kicked off in Europe, and analysts are saying it is one of the worst starts in at least a decade, with the majority of companies reporting weaker than expected profits. There have been some strong performers. Oil giant Shell, luxury group LVMH, both came out, beat expectations. Their share prices have gone up, but generally it's been a pretty poor start. Not a lot going on in commodity markets, Michael. Oil and gold are fairly steady. The Aussie dollar is still buying just over 65 US cents.
Jury's out on your use of the term froth, Sean. Is it a business? Is it an accepted business term? Froth?
Frothy. I think frothy is actually.
Oh.
It's like exuberance and, sort of entrepreneurial.
Yeah. No, look, I mean, if you want to use it, then go for it. I would never be one to pull you up on any language that you use.
No, of course not.
All right, we'll be back in a moment with the rest of the day's business news. Sean, what happened in Parliament yesterday, outside, of course, the workplace legislation?
Question time was all about tax cuts, or at least the changes to stage 3 tax cuts, more accurately. Anthony Albanese spruiked his government's track record on providing affordable housing in response to an attack from the Greens on property investors. They highlighted the fact that the Prime Minister is a property investor. Perhaps, though, the highlight was the Papua New Guinea Prime Minister thanking Australian governments and investors for their economic support in an historic speech. James Marape yesterday became the first Pacific leader to address federal parliament. He used his speech to reflect on the nearly 50 years since PNG was granted independence from Australia in 1975. Marape spoke of PNG moving away from being a donor-recipient nation and towards becoming economically important and self-sufficient, thanking Prime Minister Anthony Albanese for signing a recent bilateral agreement. It was just a nice moment of bipartisanship yesterday.
Yeah, it is. Mentioned this one at the top of the show, Sean. AGL Energy has announced a quadrupling of its core profit. I can't help saying that oddly. It's just such a... you don't get to say that very often in terms of profit, do you? Quadrupling of its core profit, and a big hike as well in dividends on the back of much higher energy prices.
Yes, that meant its share price went up 10% yesterday. The core profit measures what the group is making on a day-to-day basis. And for the 6 months to the end of December, AGL made much more than it did 12 months earlier. CEO Damien Nick said the power stations were doing better, the energy market was more stable, and customers were paying higher prices. Don't we know that? All those conditions have continued into 2024, hence the share price surge. AGL's biggest shareholder is Mike Cannon-Brookes' Grok Ventures, and in 2022, it was forced to abandon a splitting of the company into two after Grok opposed the move. Mr. Nick said AGL was progressing its pipeline of new clean energy projects as it looks to replace old coal power stations heading for closure. AGL is targeting new clean energy generation and storage capacity of about 5 gigawatts by 2030, on its way to a massive 12 gigawatts by 2035.
Another company to report a quadrupling. God, I'm going to say it twice today, Sean.
You do, yes. How exciting.
Double quadrupling and octupling.
Octupling, yeah, maybe.
And it's factually inaccurate, of course, because it's two separate companies. But anyway, another company that also has a quadrupling of net profits. Reported yesterday was Transurban. More drivers are using their roads and financing costs are falling, really helping the company to that big jump in earnings.
Yeah, so the result was strong and professional investors expected that, but the outlook in terms of earnings and dividends was just a touch glum. And so notwithstanding a quadrupling of net profit, Transurban's share price rose just 1% yesterday. Now, mostly it has toll roads in Sydney, or it has it in other states as well, and in North America. But Sydney's most important for Transurban's earnings. Traffic in that city rose 1.2%. There was WestConnex was really where there was a lot more traffic in that instance. In Melbourne, traffic was up 2.3%, and in Brisbane, it was up 2.6%. Traffic in North America rose more than 5%, and the company said it is looking at toll roads in that geography in North America going forward.
One of the country's biggest home builders, Mirvac, reported yesterday and said higher interest rates and weaker first home buyer activity were slowing the market.
While it kept its profit guidance for the full year stable, margins are definitely being squashed. Mirvac builds homes, and that's about 2/3 of its revenue. It also invests, and that's the bulk of the rest of its turnover. It settled 1,131 lots in the 6 months to December, which was actually up sharply from a year earlier. But exchanges, and they were down 25%. And pre-sales also fell. Now, Michael, I'm sure you bought and sold a house, so you exchange first and at some point in the future you settle. So exchanges is really showing where the market is going, and exchanges were down 25%. So that's something to worry about, although the fact that margins are holding up meant that the share price jumped nearly 5% yesterday. Another REIT, Real Estate Investment Trust, that reported yesterday was Charter Hall Longwale. It's going to divest about $500 million worth of commercial property to reduce its debt load. It had to write down part of its portfolio, which sent its interim earnings to a $258.4 million statutory loss. We've spoken a little bit about this. These big commercial property owners, they have to revalue their properties coming into earnings season. And once there have been a few sales and the values have dropped, it sometimes makes their bottom line at a statutory level look very, very poor.
News Corp Chief Executive Robert Thomson says the media company is close to being paid for its content by artificial intelligence companies. This is interesting.
He was talking after the Murdoch-controlled company announced a better-than-expected 6 months to the end of December, with pre-tax earnings up across most parts of its business. News owns digital real estate assets like REA, HarperCollins, the book publisher, Foxtel, titles including the Wall Street Journal, the London's The Times, the Australian, the Daily Telly, the Herald Sun here in Australia, of course. Now, Mr. Thompson said negotiations with AI firms were at an advanced stage, saying courtship is preferable to courtrooms when dealing with the AI companies, according to a report in the Financial Review. Late last year, the New York Times sued Microsoft and OpenAI for using its content to develop generative AI services. OpenAI has started striking deals to pay to access content and has so far signed up Associated Press and Germany's Axel Springer. News is looking at doing something similar. Its share price jumped 6% yesterday.
Online property group REA has delivered a 22% jump in first half profit as home listings rise, particularly in Sydney and Melbourne.
REA and its competitor Domain rely very much on how healthy the property market is. Well, more that people are buying and selling homes rather than how the actual prices are going. Yesterday, REA said the Australian property market remains healthy, driven by those two major cities. Outside those two, though, activity is more subdued. REA's share price dropped more than 4% yesterday.
Okay, turning to international news, and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu yesterday rejected Hamas's terms for a ceasefire and hostage release agreement, vowing to continue the war until, quote, absolute victory, and criticising any arrangement that leaves the militant group in full or partial control of Gaza after the war.
Mr. Netanyahu's remarks, made as US Secretary of State Antony Blinken was in the region to try and broker a ceasefire deal, underscores how wide the chasm is between Israel and Hamas. The conflict is entering its 5th month. Now, according to Associated Press, Mr. Netanyahu said military pressure was the best way to free the roughly 100 hostages held in captivity in the Gaza Strip. The PM was responding to a detailed 3-phase plan by Hamas that would unfold over 4.5 months. The plan, which came as a response to a proposal drawn up by the US, Israel, Qatar and Egypt, stipulates that all hostages would be released in exchange for hundreds of Palestinians imprisoned by Israel, including senior militants, and an end to the war.
Finally, Sean, something a bit lighter to finish on, and it's one that we mentioned at the top of the show. The foldable iPhone and iPad is on the way, with Apple planning to go against years of fighting the folding phone and launching its own version.
According to US media reports, Apple is working on a clamshell-style folding phone, taking on Samsung, Google, Oppo and Motorola, which have been providing that style of phone for many years. Consumers have said they like being able to open and close their phones, but Apple has always resisted. According to the Financial Review, the Galaxy Z Flip 5 phone has sold pretty well despite some problems with its durability. Folding OLED screens still are not as hardy as glass-coated standard screens. That's the problem. Also, screen protectors that are applied to mitigate this can bubble and peel off over time. Still a ways to go there. The report in the US media says an Apple Flip won't be available until at least 2026, but it looks like they're caving in.
Would you do it?
Yeah. I'm an Apple convert too over the last 10 years, but I was Android initially, and I did have a flip phone, very, very kind of noughties or something or other, I suppose it is. But I always think it protects the face of it. So I do quite like it. It's smaller often.
It's also quite satisfying to flip a phone shut.
Yeah.
Just if you want to hang up on someone, you flip it closed and you feel very cool. A shameful confession here, Sean. I had a flip phone and it was a Motorola phone and I absolutely loved that phone. The main feature that attracted me to it it's going to make me sound really shallow and really vain.
No, it won't. It won't. No, not at all.
But the main feature that drew me to this phone was the outside of the flip part was a mirror, and it was really useful. It was really useful to check my hair in.
You have said that publicly now.
No, but I mean, it was just so easy when you could just do it and it would fit right into the palm of your hand. It was actually a mirror and you're just like, yep, I'm all good.
I look good. All right.
Away we go. You would have done that, wouldn't you? Back in the day?
Absolutely. Yeah. When I had hair.
The good old days. All right. Up next is the Fear and Greed Daily Interview. Kirk Cheeseman is your guest today, Group Managing Director at National Credit Insurance. Going into this interview, Sean, I didn't understand what National Credit Insurance did, but it was so interesting.
Yeah. So they basically provide a service for companies waiting to get paid, and they can ensure that their debtors pay. As a result, they really do have a finger on the pulse of the economy. They know what sectors are doing well, what sectors aren't doing so well, and we talked to Kirk all about that. Well worth a listen.
Yeah, absolutely. It feels like they're seeing it in real time, which has just made this a really interesting conversation. It is up next in the Fear and Greed playlist on your podcast platform or at fearandgreed.com.au. And don't forget that new episode of How Do They Afford That as well, which comes out every Wednesday. This week's episode has been very popular so far, Sean. It is the top 10 ways to save this frugal February. So it's basically just 10 savings hacks. I know you like it when we call them hacks instead of tips or tricks or anything like that.
Hacks in my day was something you did when you'd been playing sport and you're really hot and you just, whatever.
What is that? What is that context?
You didn't grow up in Orange. You didn't grow up in Orange in country New South Wales. That's what we called it. Spitting.
Oh,
that's what spitting
like
was.
Hacking.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Oh, no. Well, I mean, to be fair, I did grow up in country New South Wales,
you did,
but I mean, I was also using a flip phone to check my hair, so I probably
a little more gentrified than me.
Yeah. Anyway, thank you, Sean.
Thanks, Michael.
It's Friday, the 9th of February, 2024. Make sure you're following the podcast and please join us online on LinkedIn, Instagram, X, and Facebook. I'm Michael Thompson, and that was Fear and Greed Business News. Have a great day.